So I told him, have a good day, honey. I love you. And then he's like, love you too. And then he went out the door and I never saw him again. Lord, please show me. I don't know how I'm going to go on. I don't know what to do. I remember looking out the window of my kitchen, of my rental house, and I thought, oh, will this be the day? Because every day I would look out for the military notification team. Every day. I think I've looked out that window thousands of times. And I looked out the window and there they were getting out of their car. So, all in uniform. And I knew that this was the day that they were going to tell me that he's not coming back. Hi, my name is Sherilyn Baldwin. I am a native of Ohio. So I was born and raised on a farm in Grafton. And I'm just here to tell my story about how God has helped me through my life. So I was really thinking about what I wanted to say, and I was going back through my life and all the situations that have happened. And I realized that even before I was born, God was preparing me for what I was going to have to deal with throughout my lifetime. So early on in my years of being on the farm, I remember spending a lot of time outdoors. So I would stand at the edge of the cow barn with the doors wide open, looking up at the stars, and I wondered, God, are you there? I heard about you in church, but I just really was asking questions. Do you see me? Do you know my name? Do you understand what I'm going through? Because I felt kind of alone being outside all the time, only being with the cows. I was milking the cows for many years. So those questions began early on in my life. Does God see me? Does he have a plan for my life? And those are questions that I would continue to ask throughout my childhood. So one of my earlier memories was of my grandmother. And she was a woman of faith, but she struggled a great deal throughout her childhood and her lifetime. And I remember her, she was sad a lot. And I was wondering, why so sad? And she would tell stories over and over again at family get-togethers. And she would tell the same stories over and over again about her dad. So she would tell the story about her dad, who was a prisoner of war in World War I, and he was captured during the Battle of the Marne, and they marched the group of men that were captured through Europe. And while they were marching, they decided they were going to make an American flag while they were in captivity. So they saw a dead woman lying in the street, and they cut a little blue part of her skirt off and put it in his coat, and they just kept marching until they got to the camp. And when he was in there, he found that there were red and white tobacco sacks that he could trade his food rations for. So they made a flag. And when he was released from captivity at the end of the war, he came home and he brought the flag with him. And then he got married, and my grandmother was born, and then he died at the Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C. from complications of hard labor and being mustard gas during the war. And my grandmother was 7 years old at the time, and she was devastated. So growing up, all she had was that flag and a few of his belongings and his writings. He was a musician, which is why he survived, because they had him as a musician work in the labor camp during the day, and then he would play for the German officers at night, so they kept him alive. But he was very ill, so after he passed, those are the only things that she had, and she clung to them, and she would just tell the stories over and over again of things that only a few things that she really knew about him. So she was devastated, and her mom remarried and left. So she was passed around her whole childhood. So she was kind of like, well, sort of like a refugee, just being passed around from family to family. So I thought, this is so sad, you know. When I'm a parent, I'm going to really take good care of my kids, not realizing that when, later on, my own husband would go missing and be declared deceased by the United States Army, and then I would be a single parent myself, and my kids would have lost a father also. Did not realize that at the time. So that really made a big impression on my life. And I guess I'll just tell the story. You know, when I was in Korea as a missionary, I met my husband, who was in the United States Army. We met in 2093, and we got married later that year in Korea. And it was really wonderful. And then we had a wedding and a gathering later after we went back to the United States. We were stationed at Fort Bragg, and we had one little guy, Daniel. And then we got orders to go overseas to Germany. We had 2 more children while we were in Germany. That would be Joseph and Stephen. So we had 3 boys. So coming up to 2001, John was working at the Heidelberg Med-Ec, and things, you know, were going pretty well. And then 9/11 happened. So it's 2001. And he got orders for a special assignment during that time for something unrelated to the terrorist attack. But I remember the day he went out the door. The baby was crying, and you know what happens in the morning when you have little kids. So I told him, you know, have a good day, honey. I love you. And then he's like, love you too. And then he went out the door, and I never saw him again. So, and you know, this was a time during a terrorist attack. So it was devastating on the military community in the first place, because everybody knew we were going to war. But then I was overseas in Germany with 3 little kids, and my newborn, one of them being a newborn baby, and my husband was missing. So I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. I honestly wasn't sure what was going to happen. I just took one day at a time. So the military had no idea where he was, so they declared him Dust 1, duty station unknown, and we were stuck in Germany for the next couple months without any contact with family. I could only talk to my family on the phone. Nobody could come because the airplanes weren't flying. So I felt alone and isolated. You know, when you're having an emergency, you want to be able to have family to come help you, but that wasn't possible. So I had a little baby, 2 toddlers, because my oldest was 3, the other one was 1.5. I had a 7-week-old. I was in a foreign country with no family around me, and my husband was missing. So I was devastated beyond words. I can't even describe the feeling of fear and devastation when you don't know where your loved one is, if they're dead or alive. So, you know, I became a Christian when I was 23. I accepted Christ, and I read my Bible, and I prayed and different things, and the Lord brought me to a place where I went on the mission field. And I really believe that the times on the mission field in Korea prepared me, and the really, really hard times on the farm growing up. It was hard. It was not easy being a child of a farmer. So I believe those things helped to prepare me for my husband being missing. So one of the things that I decided I was going to do was I made a list, because I felt like I couldn't get up in the morning. I felt like I couldn't get dressed. All the basic things that you do for yourself. And then I was trying to care for 3 young children with no help. We did have a lady who was helping with babysitting, but other than that, there was no support. So I literally made a list of things that I was going to do to survive. And I mean, on that list was like eat at least 1 meal a day, because I felt like I couldn't eat. And then I was going to make sure that no matter what, I took my children to the church service, because even though I didn't feel like going out and doing anything, we really, really needed the support of people of faith, people that could pray for us and help us as much as we could, as much as they could. And then also on that list was like showering, because when your spirit and your mind is that crushed and pressed down, it's hard to do the simple things. So just showering, putting on clean clothes every day, and then just spending time with God, sitting with God. I was determined that I was at least going to do those things. So day after day after day, we were stuck in Germany, not able to fly out. We didn't even have orders to go anywhere. There was no word as to where my husband was, how he was. Nobody had a clue. He was on special assignment. And because we had just had a terrorist attack, the whole military was focused on securing the area. They weren't really worried about one missing soldier when they had so much to deal with, and the towers had gone down, and the Pentagon was attacked, and the plane had crashed in Pennsylvania. I didn't even see any of that because I didn't have television to watch. So all I knew that my husband was missing, and they weren't paying attention to him being missing. So finally we got orders to go back to Ohio. And my mom flew over when they allowed the airplanes to start flying again. And she flew over to Germany and helped me, because I had a whole household of all of our belongings. And so I had to pack a whole household. We did have movers, but I didn't want them to touch John's things. So I packed up all his stuff, all his clothing, boxed it up, and said goodbye to the house that we had all our children in. It was like my whole life changed in one day. And then I was totally on a different trajectory, totally in a different direction that I did not want to go in. I didn't want to be in that situation. I wanted to go back, but I couldn't. It was like a point of no return. So I had to choose to go forward. And so my mom helped. We flew back, but it's an 8-hour plane flight, and I was devastated. I pretty much cried the whole international flight back to, I think we were flying into Pittsburgh, and then going from there to Cleveland. And as I was struggling, because I had my kids with me, so you know what it's like to fly with little kids, or most people can imagine that it's very difficult, but I was just devastated. And there was a mission team on the airplane, and they found out about my situation, and the mission team, some of the guys stepped up and they held the children the entire flight so I could just grieve the losses that would begin in my life. And it was amazing. God showed up during that time of extreme sorrow in my life, because I pretty much felt like I wasn't going to make it. I don't know how I'm going to make it. I don't think I'm going to make it. And then God sent people to help me, because my mom was equally devastated. You know, at the time she was 60, and she flew all the way over by herself to get me during a time when there was a terrorist, attack. So she really stepped up, and she was a great woman of faith during that time, but she was scared too. So when we touched down in the United States, I had nowhere to live. So I had to move back into my parents' old farmhouse with my 3 boys. And I felt like at that point my life was done. I didn't know how I was going to go forward. And at that time too, growing up on the farm was not easy. So I spent a lot of time planning on how to get out and have a new life. And there I was, back there in the farmhouse with my kids. And I felt like my whole life had just collapsed. I didn't know where my husband was, if he was dead or alive. So I had to start making some decisions about how to move forward, which was really hard. When you don't know if your husband is dead or alive, you don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden you're in charge and you've got 3 little kids. You just do the best you can. So I did. So one of the things that I decided to do was get a rental place. And so we did that. We moved in. And then a year went by and he's still missing. I'm trying to move forward. But this whole time my heart is just crushed, because my husband, who is my beloved husband, is I don't know if he's dead or alive. So that whole first year, as I would put the boys to bed, I would go out and sit outside. If it was raining, if it was snowing, I would just sit with God and say, at first I just cried. Like, I would just sit, because that was one of the things on my list. I'm just going to sit with God. So I just cried. I cried, and then I would begin to pray. After a few weeks of just crying, I started praying and asking the Lord. I looked up at the stars, just like I had looked up at the stars when I was a kid. Like, are you there? Do you see me? Do you love me? Is there a plan for me? What is it? I can't imagine that this could possibly be the plan, especially when I said, yeah, I went on the mission field. I followed what you wanted me to do. Like, I said, I did everything that you asked me to do. And still, this is where I'm at. And I don't understand. I kind of felt like Job a little bit, except I know I wasn't perfect, but I felt like it. I felt like, I've done what you asked me to do. Why is this happening? And why is this happening to the kids? They need a dad, So at that point, I remember going into my room and writing in my journal and saying, I feel like my life is over. I don't know how I'm going to go on. And I began to pray, and I said, Lord, please show me. I don't know how I'm going to go on. I don't know what to do. And then as if it was an audible voice, I heard this voice say, look to the spring. And I know it wasn't me. So I was like, look to the spring. What does that mean? So after the first year, the spring came and went, nothing. So that I was like, wait, I don't understand it. The spring came and went. Let me go back, because it was November, and then he told me to look to the spring, and then the spring came and went, and then we hit the 1 year mark, and I said, Lord, I know you spoke to me. I know you told me to look to the spring. So when the 1.5 year mark came, that was springtime, and I had a day of prayer and fasting. I remember that I had sent out some emails and a few letters to close friends saying, would you please pray and fast with me? Because I know the Lord had told me to look to the spring. And I know spring came and went. Now here's the other spring. I know it. I know he has something, but please pray and fast. And so they did. And then on the first day of spring, we were signing for our new house because his life insurance had finally come through. They had declared him deceased. The military declares a soldier dead if there's no sign of life after a year, but I kept holding on to hope. But I had no choice, so they declared him deceased, so I had to take the life insurance. So I got a house for the boys because I wanted them to have a place. And I remember we signed on the first day of spring. And I mean, that was a time of joy and a time of sorrow, because you're supposed to, when you do those milestone things, have your spouse with you. I was doing everything by myself. So days later, though, I remember looking out the window of my kitchen of my rental house, and I thought, oh, will this be the day? Because every day I would look out for the military notification team. Every day. I think I looked out that window thousands of times. And I looked out the window, and there they were getting out of their car. So, all in uniform. And I knew that this was the day that they were going to tell me that he's not coming back. So, when God told me to look to the first day of the spring, I had hope maybe that he would come back alive, but I knew that he probably wasn't going to. But when they came in and they told me, on behalf of the United States of America, I didn't even remember what they said. It was all kind of went blank and echoey, but they were telling me that he was not coming back, that they have recovered his remains finally. Which was actually an answer to prayer, but it's not what I wanted. I did not want that. I wanted my husband to come back. I refused to give up hope until they told me that there was no hope, and then they told me there was no hope. So it was kind of like, once again, you're starting at a place where you're grieving again. So I had to start the grieving process again, but I was able to at least have his remains back. So it took 2 months for them to return his remains. So we had a funeral in May. I had to choose between Mother's Day and the weekend of his birthday. I chose not to have it on Mother's Day because I did not want his mother to have to endure every Mother's Day knowing that that's when her son was buried. So I chose the weekend of his birthday. He's buried in South Carolina. So this is sad. However, I want to tell you about my husband a little bit. He was an Army doctor. He was very, very smart, but he had a really goofy sense of humor, which I always appreciated. He was a great dad. Even after working 12-hour shifts, he would come home and play with the boys. He was just a good husband. And he was a man of faith. He had his struggles, I think he struggled a lot, Does God see me? Is God there? Because there was a lot to deal with through his childhood and, through in his work. He saw a lot of tragedy. You can't be in the medical field without seeing that kind of thing. So I think he had those struggles, but he was a man of faith as well. So we had decided to put the boys in Christian school before I didn't know he was going to be gone all in one day, but we had made that decision. So in Ohio, when it came time for the boys to go to school, we chose the local Christian school, which is so amazing because they did not open until that year. The first year that I needed a Christian school was the first year that they opened the elementary portion of that school. So it was such an amazing thing. I do want to go back to where God shows up. Even in the greatest sorrow, God, He showed up. So I remember when the notification team came to notify me, I was completely heartbroken that my husband was not going to come back alive. So I drove over to the new property that we had just signed for on the first day of spring, and we had like woods, and I ran all the way to the back of the woods, and I dropped to my knees. It was right by the river. We had just had a terrible storm, and I remember crying. I was sobbing, and I was on my knees at the river asking God, why is this happening? I need help. I don't know if I can do this. I can't do this. I didn't sign up for this. And then I look up, and there was a broken tree that had just broken that morning with the storm. And there's part of the tree, and then the other tree. It was huge. I looked up, and there was this giant cross right across the river. And I knew that. I was like, God, I know you're here. I know you're here. I know you're going to help me. And I went back later that day, and it had stormed some more, and the water was rushing. I went back to get a picture. It was gone. So I wish I would have gotten a picture of it, but it was like God was telling me, you know, I am here, because He told me to look to the spring. Spring came. He brought back my husband's remains, because I remember praying, and I said, Lord, I cannot not know. I have to know. It's gonna just eat me alive. I have to know, is he dead or alive? And the Lord made it so, brought back his remains, which is a miracle in itself, how he was recovered. So that I am thankful. So the Lord has shown up so many times throughout my life. Even being a single parent is really hard, and I know that there's so many military widows out there, and so many women who have lost their husbands, and they have young children. It's one of the hardest things to be a single parent. Before I didn't really notice single parents. I didn't really have a heart or a compassion, because I did not know how hard it was. But I just want to encourage those that have lost a husband, or, you know, you're parenting by yourself, that you're not alone. Because during the times when I was raising my boys, I took them to church, and there were so many men around to help raise them and to be good examples, and also the coaches at the Christian school, any kind of men that were, you know, solid, that could be of influence to the boys. I tried to get them involved, and that was so key. Even like my dad and my brothers, it was just so important. And God provided time after time after time men who could help support me as a single parent. It was very important. But it's just excruciating to try to do it by yourself with no support. But with support around you in a community, it's a whole lot easier. One of the things I decided early on was, when somebody offered help, if it was reasonable, I wasn't going to say no. You know, before that, I was very prideful in being independent and doing things myself. But I was so broken, and so needy in a way that when you have 3 little kids, you need a lot. So I just, you know, if somebody offered to help, I would say, yeah, you know, help me. I accept it. You know, there's so many lessons about, you know, how God takes care of us. He's the good shepherd. And he gives us what we need. It said, you know, he makes us lie down in green pastures. He leads us beside the still waters. He restores my soul. And so during that time, he provided for us. When we needed things, he made sure that I could get rest. It was hard to sleep, let me just say. I remember when my husband was missing. He was missing for a year and a half, 18 months. No clue whether he was dead or alive. And my youngest son would wake up screaming every night for his daddy. Like 3 or 4 times a night, "Daddy, Daddy." And I would hear him screaming. My room was right across from his room. He was in a top bunk and my other son was below. And so he would wake him up also. And then like 3 or 4 times a night, I would have to go and comfort him. So not only was I grieving, but I was sleep deprived during that time. And that's when I started sitting outside and just praying, and I would drink tea, because chamomile tea is very soothing. I still do that. And I would pray and ask the Lord to not only heal my heart, but heal the hearts of the broken hearts of my children, because they were so devastated. And then my other son, he just kind of stopped bonding with people, and he didn't talk much. The only person that he wanted to sit on the lap of was my brother, because I know he missed his dad, but he couldn't even talk and express it. So they all were going through a grieving process. And then my youngest was just a little baby, and when he was growing up, he said, "Mama, I didn't even get to hear Daddy say my name even one time." So it's just heartbreaking, the losses that, you know that because you're an adult, you know you're going to be okay. But when your children are hurting like that, it's just a whole different level of grief that you know that it's going to be different for each kid, and you just have to work through the process. And it was years and years and years of working through that grieving process with the boys. But I really believe that the Lord was with me, and he provided people for me. He was faithful in that. So there's so many stories to tell of how God showed up, and if you had like 6 hours, but I just want to say that I still feel pain, the pain of loss, because the loss is not just the moment that they are gone, but it's all the moments that they miss, all the moments that they aren't there, like that empty seat at the table. My son just got married. I was really not looking forward to being the only parent there, because I knew that, it's like another one of those things that he wasn't there for, all of those milestones. So the grieving process doesn't stop, but God, He's healed me enough so that I'm able to go forward. And also He's given me new things to do in life. Like I finished graduate school when I was age 49 and started teaching English as a second language. So, the boys, they're out of the house, but they still really need counsel and guidance. So the Lord gives me wisdom in order to provide that, because I'm not their dad. And sometimes they need their dad still. And so I have to stop and ask God for wisdom for that. And He does. He gives that to me. So, and He continues to do that. And life does not stop for anything, for good times, for bad times. It keeps going. And one of the things that I need to remember day by day is that people around me are hurting. I might be hurting, but there's also people around me that are having difficulties. And as much as I can, I will try to help them to get through what they're going through, because I know that God has helped me get through my difficult times. So grief does not stop during this lifetime, but God promises us that He'll never leave us nor forsake us. He gives us that promise. I know this because when I bought the house, that I was purchasing, and I went in. It was a mess. We had to clean it out. There was this little Sunday school paper hanging from the light, you know, with the little string and the clip with the scribbling on it that the kids do in Sunday school. And it said, "I will never leave you." And I cried because I knew, I was like, that's like a note from God. He promises that he'll never leave us or forsake us. And that if we seek him, we will find him if we seek him with all our heart. So I really believe that. And I know things aren't going to be pain-free, but I know that God promises that he'll walk with me. And I have to believe that he's going to do that with my young men now. They're all in their 20s. So it's really scary being a parent of young men because life just keeps going and things keep coming up. But I have to trust that God's going to take care of it.